Welcome to the Geek 101 podcast. Road to Arrowverse Crisis, episode 8. The only episode I will be drunk throughout because of Arrow season 6. I'm your host, Andy Bowman, and with me as always are special guests, Tessa and Sam. How are you doing today, guys?
Well, could be talking about a better season of television.
Mm-hmm.
But otherwise, any season.
Not even Arrow, just other shows.
But other than that, doing okay. Excited to be here.
All right. Well, I went ahead and tipped my hand about how I feel about Arrow season 6. How do you guys feel about Arrow season 6 as a whole?
This is the worst season of TV in the Arrowverse. And as I have said, I think pretty much every week up to this point, it's interesting to think about how much Berlanti et al. Knew about Crisis and when they decided Crisis was a thing and when they started planning for it. This season of Arrow makes it very, very clear that they are thinking about Crisis and they're preparing for it. And that's why the season's so terrible. They are just marking time, spinning wheels, no sudden movements, just to keep the show going until we can get all the other shows where they need to be for Crisis. And that's why it's so bad.
The only good thing about this season, like looking back on it now that we've had another season of Arrow and the beginning of this current and final season of Arrow, the only good thing about looking back at this season is knowing that this is the lowest point. Knowing that everything from here on out gets much, much better. And that the show that we all fell in love with at the beginning isn't just doomed to sort of die alone in a terrible, terrible position here. That it does get better than this, but it is a terrible season. It's really bad. I remember watching it and basically hate watching it for most of this season, to be quite honest with you. Sam will tell you there was a lot of shouting at the television on occasion.
There was. On both of our parts.
Yeah.
I think we both had our turn.
But we kept watching it because we knew Crisis was going to happen. So maybe this is actually a brilliant strategy on Berlanti's part. Knowing that we're not going to stop watching it because we know that it's building up to Crisis. But yeah, it's definitely not the best.
Okay. God, I'm just trying to think about how to even begin talking about the terrible choices that were made.
Well, I think the best place to start is by talking about how the stakes of the season 5 cliffhanger are just immediately cut out. Within the first, I think, minute of the first episode, we know that I believe Diggle and Renee are not dead, and I think Curtis is revealed next. All within that opening sequence. We find out pretty quickly that Felicity is still alive too. And basically you find out very, very quickly at the beginning of the episode that really the only people we know of who are dead are Merlin and William's mother. And the only question mark that hangs over the entire episode, Quentin is still alive too. We do get confirmation. We get confirmation of everybody except for Thea. And of course, Thea's in a coma, which means she's not going to die. They will bring her back. And so this, I think the best way to start about how ineffective the season was is how ineffective that cliffhanger was rendered.
Yeah, that's a great point. Immediately it seems like, status quo.
Except for John's nerve damage, which is a super not fun storyline.
Well, and I mean, I don't know if I would consider this to be complete bridging, but it's like half bridging to have William's mom die. Like, basically that entire character was a plot device so Oliver would get stuck with William at the beginning of this season. Because we do get William as Oliver's son living with him and Felicity.
Isn't that a full bridging?
I mean, yeah, It is fridging. It's hard because she's such a minor character, so it's a little
It's like
harder
a
to
mini
care.
fridge, like
Yeah.
a dorm room.
I mean, but she doesn't. I mean, she literally gets pulled to the island so she can die in that. And the fact that she's one of the two characters who do die on the island, it really highlights the fact that she was a plot device. Like, there's no reason to have her in the show at all, or to die even in such a way, except for to bring William further into Oliver's life. And we will, of course, talk about how terrible William is in this season as well. I have a couple points to make about how terrible William is in this season, but it just, I remember being extremely excited about watching Arrow at the end of last season, and then extremely disappointed at the beginning of this season. Like, it's just like you said, it goes back to status quo.
Yeah. Well, let's. This season is just such a mess. Okay, let's talk about what is one of the most hyped for me editions. I'm sure Sam was really excited about this particular edition. The main villain, the main bad, Michael Emerson, who fans might recognize from Lost.
Yes, I really enjoyed I enjoy his characters whenever they do show up on various shows. I don't know. I think we talked about this before we started the podcast. He's not used very well. He's great in what he does. The same thing is true with the actor who plays Diaz. From we knew him from Fringe as well, but Michael Emerson's not used very well. But I was happy to see him.
Well, I mean, this was a villain that was teased at the midpoint of the last season of season 5. At some point, this other hacktivist, Elena, gets in contact with Felicity and ends up sort of tricking her into freeing Caden James, who is this hacker who has caused all sorts of chaos in the U.S. and has been basically kidnapped by Argus, as they do. And so Felicity sort of tricked into letting him go, and that's sort of the tease, right? Is that we now have this hacker who's able to wreak all of this havoc on the U.S., who's loose, and we knew basically, I think we all knew from the last season that he would be the villain of this season, or at least a major villain of this season. And he's definitely positioned that way in the first 3 episodes. He has some sort of vendetta against Oliver. And
yeah, bad news. Yet again, somebody else is upset by something Oliver did.
Right, and we're not told what that is, I think, until about mid-season, right? We just know that he hates Oliver and he wants him to suffer. Much like Dark wanted him to suffer, much like Prometheus wanted him to suffer, much like Slade wanted him to suffer. And so, again, at this point, it's a little hard to take some of these villains seriously because it just seems like the same. Like, Oliver just gets on people's nerves and they want to kill him. And, I mean, it works for some characters, but it works less for others, I think.
Yeah. I'm just trying to think about the big build-up for Caden James, and then he is kind of unceremoniously replaced by Diaz as the major villain, the most thuggish and kind of like if Caden James had to be overdone by somebody, you would not have expected Diaz to be the one to do it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think that's because they don't give us anything for Caden James. Like, they don't develop him as a character very much. We just get, he's a hacker, he hates Oliver for most of the season.
It's the Agatha Christie Sherlock Holmes thing, right? Like, if you get to the end of the novel and there was no way to reasonably figure out what was going to happen or who the bad guy really was, is that good? Or, it's like, Diaz, it's so clever that it's Diaz, you had no idea. That's right, but I'm not sure that's clever, because there was no foreshadowing. You can't really go back and go, I see it.
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing about good twists, right, is that you should have, like, part of a good twist is that you have to think to yourself, oh, I should have known this the whole time. They were telling me the whole time this was going to happen, but I never would have guessed it. I mean, it's like The Prestige does a really good twist that way. Sixth Sense has a really good twist in that way. And so it's really difficult here to say that this is a good twist, that Diaz is actually the villain. He's been, puppeteering Caden James this whole time, if we had no idea that Diaz was even capable of this, right? He doesn't get developed very much until after his betrayal of Caden James. And so it's really hard because we get nothing from Caden James for most of the season. We only find out in like his last episode that he had a son and that Oliver supposedly killed his son, but it turns out someone had doctored that footage, which again, you'd think that a hacker would be able to tell if footage had been doctored. It's very flimsy, and I think that really denigrates him as a villain. But then Diaz ends up getting a lot more development in the back half of the season because we get to see flashbacks to his terrible childhood. We get to see interactions, like personal interactions between him and Black Siren. And so we get to like him more as a villain because we're given more to like.
The one thing I'll say about Caden James's storyline is, and realizing going back through the season, Elena,
yeah.
Elena has really a 3-season arc, and you don't know that it's an arc, but from the time she was introduced in season 5, and her whole arc here in season 6, which is to get Caden James unleashed on us, you don't realize it in season 6, but once you get to toward the end of season 7, there's real payoff for her as a character, not only in a plot through line, but I think she really works well. If you think about her as like a chaotic, neutral character, who's kind of capable of doing good things for the wrong reason, or wrong things for the good reason, or just whatever suits her. And we see this in this season, like her fervor to get, I think last season really, her fervor to get Caden out, and defending his motives, but then eventually kind of turning against him. That'll play out into next season. And credit where credit's due, they really laid the groundwork for what happens to her character in season 7, and it worked.
That's true. I think Alina is the most salvageable part of this particular storyline because of what happens in next
season. And speaking of salvageable things, let's talk about the one thing that another thing actually, because I was excited about Michael Emerson. We get a few episodes with Manu Bennett again.
Adventures with Slade is what I have in my notes. That's a big part of the first part of the
season. Yeah, well, it's only actually like 3 episodes, but it's so much fun that you're kind of going on about Slade's son and all these things, and there's a lot of DC lore about Deathstroke and his son. How did you guys?
Which will again play out in the next season a little bit, and this current season that we're on. So it's interesting to see how these ideas keep cropping up, and how Slade continues to be not only one of the best characters on the show, but also the idea of Deathstroke keeps cropping up as sort of Oliver's worst villain, I think.
Yeah,
in a lot of ways.
This little pod of episodes is, if you think about it from the larger business side, let's use them before they take them away from us again, and spinning their wheels trying to make time in the season. The Adventures with Slade episodes are a good way of wasting time, I suppose.
Well, yeah, and I will say too, we get to see this other side of Slade, right? Because we were originally introduced to him back in season 1. He's Oliver's friend, right? He's Oliver's ally on the island. He helps Shadow teach Oliver what he needs to know to survive on the island. And in a large part, Oliver is who he is because of Slade's help. And then we get to see, in season 2, the Mirakuru, Slade has this vendetta against Oliver because of the death of Shadow, et cetera, et cetera. He's this great villain. But now we get to see him without the Mirakuru, having fixed a lot of his issues with Oliver, and we get to see them actually be friends and team up on a semi-level playing field, I would say. And so that makes for some really interesting character development for both of them. It makes for some really interesting and just, frankly, really fun fight scenes, with them sort of destroying everyone around them. And then, yeah, you get that interpersonal play between Slade and his son, we find out a lot about his son, because his son decides to become Deathstroke to sort of be like his father. We get this really disturbing flashback where he saw his father kill someone else on a family camping trip. So there's a lot going on in these episodes, and I think that everyone, Mount Bennett and Stephen Amell especially, do a really good job of playing off of each other.
Yeah. I think like it's kind of goes back to like Stephen Amell's like love of wrestling, really. Like there's just such a weird theatricality about him and Manu Bennett going back and forth, and I don't know. I think that it's probably one of the only times where Stephen Amell has any fun at all, especially in this season particularly.
They should call the is it on Stars, I think, the new limited series about wrestling that he's doing. They should just call it Stephen Amell Has Fun.
Yeah.
Well, and the other thing I think that works really well with this pod of episodes is that a lot of it's really focused on Oliver and Slade, and so we don't get as much story building for the other characters, which frankly was kind of a relief this season because nobody was doing anything as interesting as what Oliver and Slade were doing, trying to track down Slade's son. So it was nice to have sort of a break from sort of the unending drama that is the other characters this season.
Okay, I think we should talk about the first part of the season is just there. It's definitely, I think, more of treading water than the second part of the season because something interesting happens to Oliver in a legal aspect.
Right.
And this will be a theme in both this season of Arrow and in about 20 minutes from now when we discuss this next season of Flash.
There's a really interesting connection that I noticed that I'm super happy about. I can't wait till we talk about that later. But
okay, so let's talk about this. Oliver kind of gets busted as being the Green Arrow. Kind of.
Yeah.
And so
who is even the Green Arrow this season?
It doesn't.
Is it Oliver? Is it Diggle?
Well,
is it like?
Well, remember, Roy Harper does come back.
Yeah, is it Roy Harper?
Is it Tommy Merlin?
Yeah, there's a lot of like fake outs with the Green Arrow.
It's like a whole I Am Spartacus thing. Like we're all, in our hearts, we are all the Green Arrow.
But yeah, like there's this really weird drama, right, in the first half of the season where, amongst the many dramas this season, where William, young William's played by Jack Moore, who I actually Googled Jack Moore because I wanted to discover what his age actually is. He is now 16, which means he would have been what, 14, 13 maybe when this season aired. He is clearly an older child adolescent who's playing a lot younger in this season, which is partially why I really didn't like what they did with his character, because he looks like he's old enough to actually have semi-informed opinions about what his father is doing, but instead he's spouting a lot of like early childhood fears about his father dying or like his mother did or other things like that, and the way he says them is very, very juvenile. Like I kept saying, like, I'm looking at like an older child, I'm looking at a 13 or 14-year-old, but what I'm hearing sounds like something a 5-year-old or a 6-year-old would say.
And this is the season where Oliver quits because of
yeah,
right?
Exactly. So William is very afraid that Oliver is going to die while being the Green Arrow, and so Oliver ends up giving the Green Arrow mantle over to Diggle, because he says, I need to be here for my son. I need to, learn who I am outside of the Green Arrow. And again, this was an irritating storyline, but it could have been interesting if Oliver hadn't literally 2 episodes later been like, oh, no, JK, I'm the Green Arrow again. Diggle, SOL. Like,
it also would have been interesting if, like, the law stuff had been just even close to something approaching reality. In episode 2, believe it's episode 2. Episode 2 is where we get the thing with the photo.
Yes, with
And,
Anatoly.
yeah, and so Curtis and Felicity are able to kind of get Oliver out of that, proving that it was doctored. That's all episode 2. Is that right? But the thing about it is this FBI agent who is bound and determined to get Oliver really kind of should have had to have packed up her things and left. You can't just continue to investigate people because you think they're guilty. You kind of have to have evidence. When the evidence is disproved, you have to stop. And of course we know she didn't, because as soon as Oliver gets back from his adventures with Slade, he's arrested. Right before Thanksgiving.
Arrested.
Yeah, arrested right before Thanksgiving, but manages to get out on bond before Thea gets out of her coma, but not before. So I think is there's an argument to be made that the two absolute low points of this series are in this season, and one of them is when they go to an arraignment / probable cause hearing, and they ask for what the probable cause is for arresting Oliver because the photo has been disproven, and basically the prosecutors are like, oh, we're not going to show our hand now. That's literally what a probable cause hearing is. If you can't show probable cause, the judge says, we're done. Goodbye, everybody's done. Not on bail. Not time for you to keep secrets. It's called discovery. It's called probable cause. Those are both things that require the prosecutors to turn over what they know in a timely manner. And if you can't do that, that's it. And I hate this show for ruining that.
Yeah, it was very, very difficult for me. It definitely took me out of my suspension of disbelief, which, I mean, it's a superhero show about a guy who shoots arrows and zip lines across the city. Like, it's already not, a very believable show in a lot of ways. There is a lot of suspension of disbelief, but the legal stuff really bothered me. It really caused me to be like, no, this wouldn't happen. This absolutely would not happen this way. Even if, like, everybody involved was super corrupt, it would not happen this way. If you're going to tell a story about corrupt politicians or the corruptions of the legal system, actually tell a story about how those are corrupt and how those actually worked. This just came across as very lazy writing for me that was trying to introduce drama for drama's sake.
Right, and at the end of the season with Diaz, basically Diaz just gets everybody on his payroll, and then everything's wrong because what are you going to do about it? He's in control of everybody. I'm on board with that. Because you're not trying to explain to me the way the legal system works. You're saying it's not working because Diaz is in charge. Whereas earlier in the season, they're actually trying to tell a legal story in the way that they think it should be told. So
yeah, and I'm not a huge procedural fan. I do watch SVU because for some reason I can't quit that show. But it is kind of jarring if you're used to any kind of procedural to go from that to this, because it's just anyone who even watches any legal TV at all should know that this is not how it works.
And last thing I'll say about it too, that the people behind the Arrowverse play fast and loose with time travel and parallel universes, but I don't think they've gotten things wrong. They've gotten things that don't stand up. They've mixed different theories of time travel before. But this, in a way, is even more jarring than that. And what concerns me about it, and what really gets to me big term, is when we're talking about Crisis coming up here and juggling a lot of things. And, I don't think any of us are going to get stuck in the minutia. I think if you get too stuck in the minutia, you're watching the wrong show, probably. But the big gap here with the legal system makes me think, are you going to get the rules right for Crisis? Are you going to stick to your own internal logic? Or are you just going to do what you did back there in that season of Arrow and just, this isn't convenient, we're going to do what we want instead?
Yeah, it's... I'm really trying hard to explain why it's so frustrating that, a superhero show about like you said, Tessa, about a guy shooting arrows and swinging from building to building. Why getting the law process wrong is so just I don't know, suspension of disbelief breaking. Like it's annoying.
Well, it's just because, we can, when it comes to science, right? When it comes to all of the jargon and all of the time travel theories and all of that stuff, most of us don't encounter that on a day-to-day basis. We're used to suspending our disbelief about those kinds of things. We're used to not understanding what half of the words Cisco says before he dumbs them down into English means. That means that they can play fast and loose with those concepts for the most part, and they're not going to offend the average viewer. This is something that people are actually fairly familiar with. Again, whether it's from, a procedural show like Law and Order, or if it's, just from the news, right? The way that people report on probable cause hearings, or if they report on high-profile cases. We generally know that there is corruption in the legal system, but we also understand there's a set of rules, and this is how it works. And so, again, this show is asking us to just forget everything we know about that, and then just trust that this is actually something that would happen in real life. And it just doesn't work because, again, most people know enough to know that this isn't the way that the legal system works.
Right. I'm going to take a second just to condense my entire feelings about this in a single soundbite. I think this is the reason why I would drink late at night trying to watch this season. It's just frustrating. Anyway, Sam, you were
They ask us to spend. It's now been over 5 seasons. So at the point that this happens, and thank God the crossover comes after the Oliver Arrested episode. Like, something to redeem. But you're asking us, halfway into it, the 6th season. So we've made, at this point, for a lot of people, their relationship with this show is longer than many of their adult relationships, if you think about the target demo for these shows. They're asking us to remain committed while they do these stupid things with the plot. And I'm not just, between the legal plot and new Team Arrow, they're really asking a lot.
I will say the one thing that sort of comes out of this that's interesting and that does have bearing on next season's plot is the anti-vigilante bill that gets passed this season. So there's a bill that gets because of the issue with Oliver and the legal system, there's a bill that gets put forward by some anti-vigilante politicians that gets passed. And Oliver is, of course, put into this kind of tricky position where he's still mayor, you guys. He's still mayor of the city.
Somehow, until episode 18.
Yeah. He as mayor of the city, he has to enforce this while also being the Green Arrow. And then there are, of course, a lot of people who know about him that are in positions of law enforcement, or in the case of Dinah, she's the Black Canary, but she's also, is she captain of the...
No, not yet.
Not yet. Okay, she's a higher ranking officer in the police force, and so you do get this sort of duality that starts happening where they have to sort of figure out how to navigate their belief in the law, but also their belief in vigilantism. That is something that does affect some plot points in the later season. Again, because so much bad happens in the season, it's really easy for even interesting details like this one to get just sort of mixed in with all of the bad stuff that happens this season as well. But it did have the potential to be an interesting conversation about, who gets to take the law in their own hands? What happens if everybody in the city says, no, we don't want this? Like, there were some interesting questions that were raised by it.
Yeah, and I lied. There's one more thing I want to say about the legal thing.
Yeah, go ahead.
Is that around the same time, Marvel is doing a story in the Daredevil comics where Matt Murdock is making an argument that masked superheroes can testify in the court system, and it doesn't violate the defendant's constitutional right to face their accuser. And that was actually, I thought, that was a really smart run of issues that do this way better than Arrow does. And so it's, part of the argument is, well, this isn't a legal show. Well, Marvel comics aren't legal comics, but they still managed to do it. So they point that out as well.
Yeah. So, to kind of wrap things up, because this season as a whole is probably the least worth talking about. I think that Diaz, especially the actor Kirk Acevedo, yeah, he is crazily intimidating, much more than Adrian Chase was.
Oh yeah, he's very charismatic too. Like, you can understand why like Black Siren is attracted to him. You can understand why he's able to command such an imposing presence as well.
And if you watched him on Fringe, I mean, this guy's good. If he can go from that character to this character, I mean, he's got range.
Yeah. And there's a really interesting few scenes with him and Anatoly, who ultimately decides that Oliver is worth dying for or risking his life for, which is I thought very interesting. But the moments where Oliver actually gets off of this case, and he gets off the case by having Deus Ex Machina, Christopher Chance / Human Target, come in pretending to be Tommy Merlin, claiming that he was the Green Arrow all along, and then when Diaz pays off the jury, Christopher Chance comes back in as the judge and acquits Oliver, because that's how legal things work.
And this also somehow resolves the new Team Arrow storyline too, right? As we like to call it. So apparently, no disrespect to John Oliver, but we came up with the idea of putting stupid in front of something first, because we referred to this as stupid Civil War.
Oh, it totally was. Like, as it was happening, I was like, this is stupid Civil War. Like, that is what's happening right now with these characters. And again, it's very, I don't really want to get into the details of it, but it's very drama for drama's sake. They all have problems with the way Oliver runs things. So it's Renee, Curtis, and Dinah. They all have problems with the way Oliver runs the team. They all want to sort of strike out on their own. Black Siren, who is of course Earth 2 Laurel, teams up with Caden James and Diaz for a bit, and she ends up killing. Is it Vigilante? Is that the? So she kills Vigilante, who was with Dinah. Like, they had a romantic relationship, and so Dinah, of course, wants to kill Black Siren now, and then it ends up causing this huge conflict between the two teams.
And of course, Quentin. Don't forget, Quentin is trying to redeem Earth to Laurel the entire time.
Oh, that's right, because for some reason he can't get used to the idea that she's a different person than his daughter, which is kind of creepy in some ways. But yeah,
if Dinah kills Earth 2 Laurel, that means his two daughters will have died 3 times.
That's true.
That breaks a person.
Man, Quentin Lance has so much trauma in this show about his daughters. But yeah, I mean, it's a really dumb reason for conflict. Like, nobody can say what they mean to say. It always has to be like the most insulting version of whatever it is that they're trying to say. Dinah, who has otherwise been like a pretty, like, this season especially been like, oh, well, we have to obey the law, suddenly just like decides to like, oh, to hell with it, I want to kill someone. And it's really bad. It's just bad writing all around.
But to your point, this is Christopher Chance not only solves the court stuff with his human targetness twice, as you point out, also somehow solves this new Team Arrow by getting Renee back on board and apologizing. And
it's really weird. Well, but the one thing it does give us, and again, weird, and not legal at all. But it does give us, so Black Siren ends up, as a result of this, coming out to Earth 1 as Earth 1's Laurel. So she claims that she is Laurel Lance, and that she has been held captive for 2 years in some cabin somewhere, and of course they're immediately like, oh my gosh, you're Laurel Lance, you're the Black Canary, here's your job as DA back. Like, it's so baffling to me. So we get to see evil Laurel try to be DA, and it's so weird to me because, again, nobody who's been kidnapped in a cabin for 2 years is going to be allowed to be DA of a city, even if they were DA when they were kidnapped. So it's just such bad writing. It's so bad. It's very lazy, and I get that they were trying to get certain characters to certain places by the end of the season, but this was the weirdest, laziest way to do it.
Well, let's talk about how this entire season ends, because talk about lazy ways to do things.
Yeah.
Which part? The Quentin part or the Oliver part?
Okay, well, the Quentin part, I mean, Quentin just dies.
Yeah, that's it. He's dead now.
Yeah. I think the Oliver part is particularly lazy.
Oh, the part where he agrees to go to prison if everybody else is given immunity?
Yeah.
And doesn't consult anyone about this decision?
Well, I mean,
that's Oliver.
Is that lazy writing, or is that just Oliver's character to not ask other people what to do before he makes unilateral decisions that affects all of them?
Okay,
is
fair.
that the part that's not right?
That's
or is
fair.
it the part where he has this ever-present guilt complex and makes rash decisions based on the fact that he thinks he's not a good person? He actually earned both of those fair and square.
Yeah, that's fair, I guess. It's just... The Oliver going to prison thing, it did make me interested again in the next season. And we all know, I mean, I don't think it's a spoiler to say the next season of Arrow is so much better than this one. But it's... How we got here was very convoluted, and it wasn't necessary, and it was overly dramatic.
Well, the bottom line is, if we're talking about these seasons in terms of recap, I think we just did... How much time did we spend? Half an hour on this season? We don't go back and watch the season. We did it for you.
Yeah, there you go.
You go back and watch the other seasons we've talked about, but not this one.
The only other thing that might be important is that Thea does also leave.
Thea, Roy, and Nissa, peace out.
Yeah, Roy shows back up for a bit, gets back together with Thea, they leave. And then we also see the last of Nissa. Well, we think we're going to see the last of Nissa.
Pretty much together, don't they?
Yeah.
On a mission for Lazarus?
Again, made up thing that takes Thea away from the show, which I was very sad about because, again, really out of all these characters, I really wish that they wouldn't have. I know that Willow Holland wanted out, and that's why they wrote her out. But Thea is really one of the best characters on the show, so I was very disappointed about that.
And yeah, that concludes this season. This horrible season that we shouldn't talk about. Let's talk about something better. Let's talk about the amazing addition to the Flashcast, Ralph Dibny.
Oh, yeah. I thought you were going to say Danny Trejo, but okay.
This season of Flash was so much better than season 3, so it's kind of nice to be able to talk about something that makes us happy for once.
All right. So, yeah, like I said before, we have an amazing new addition as Ralph Dibny as the Elongated Man.
Yeah, I've told Andy and Sam this, I hated Ralph Dibny for the first episode and a half that he was on. He just seemed to me like some kind of, I don't know, character, really dumb character for Barry to sort of bounce off of. But this character is sort of infectious. He definitely gets you over on his side. He's just so, well-meaning and incompetent at the same time. but actually, really engaging in some ways. And he, even though he has some very antiquated views about women at the beginning of the series, he definitely grows a lot in his interactions with the other characters. I don't know, what did you guys think about?
So, I mean, this is probably the biggest fish out of water for Team Arrow. Even with Stupid Wells, you still had somebody who wanted to do well, who wanted to do good. And this is a guy who's really, I feel like this is a real person trying to figure out what to do with these powers, because he can do all these weird things. And he's also kind of a sleazeball, and Barry hates him out of the right away. Like it's such a great addition to the Flash cast. That's really all I can say. Is just this was infectious, and once he kind of got out of being a character from the 1940s and a drunk, and he was just great. I really love Ralph Dibny.
And it really makes, the fact that by that character turn that both of you pointed out, the fact that he's turned into a very likable character by the end of the season adds stakes, because we really get a sense that he is in peril. I know we'll get to it, but the very real possibility. In fact, I don't think it was a possibility. I think Tessa and I both assumed that he died later on in the season. Of course, he doesn't. But that really gives this season some stakes in a way that the other season of the other show didn't.
Well, and the best part about Dibny in this season and in other appearances that he has is his interactions with other members of Team Flash. Especially, I think specifically I wanted to call out his interactions with Cisco are particularly good, and his interactions with Caitlin/Killer Frost are particularly good. Those three characters mesh really well together. And I think that part of it's because Cisco and Caitlin, even though they have a lot of good friend chemistry together, they're both really smart people who are metas as well, and they get along really well. And I think Dibny allows another perspective in on Team Flash. This person who maybe isn't as sciencey, but he does actually have a lot of common sense and a lot of sort of emotional intelligence. Weirdly, even though what he says is usually the wrong thing the first time. And so I think that those interactions, I don't know, it brought a lot of enjoyment to those interactions for me as a viewer watching the show. Right.
Now, what did you guys think about this season's version of HR, which it basically was the old Harry.
Harry 2. Yeah. Harry from Earth 2.
Yeah, this
Harry
is great.
2 is the best Harry.
Yeah, Harry from Earth 2 is the best version of Harrison Wells. Yeah, I mean, Tom Cavanaugh, as we've said before, is great in almost all of the roles that he takes on this show, which there have been. But Harry is certainly our favorite, and I think they brought him back specifically because the villain this season was the Thinker. I think there's something about Harry, especially, that lends itself to that sort of story. But we get to see him be all gruff and, the grumpy uncle that everyone loves, but like is kind of scared to talk to him.
Yeah, and the thing that we get later in the season with the thinking cap and his diminishing mental capacity, in terms of intelligence, is really a way to put into focus that what his journey in this season is a journey to emotional intelligence. Making up with Jesse, which we find out they have some conflict and they need to spend some time apart. But when you're in the Arrowverse, spending some time apart means literally going to a different universe or a different Earth. And, by the end of the season, when Harry leaves, he is still gruff, but he is more able to emote. And that's a really nice character progression that I enjoyed.
Yeah, I thought that the Harry stuff is great. I also like Jesse. I think she only shows up in 2 episodes this season. But when she does show up, we get to see some really great interactions between her and Harry. An episode that really stuck out to me this season was Enter Flash Time, where she and Barry, there's like a bomb that explodes, and they both have to enter Flash Time, which is basically with Jay, yeah, where since they're speedsters and they can move faster than everybody else, they sort of get a little bit more time to figure out how to avert the bomb. But we get some really great insight, I think, into Harry as a character through Jesse slowly resolving conflict with him, even though he's not even really talking for most of the episode. And I think that these characters are great. I enjoy them when they show up, certainly.
Now, let's see here. This is also the last season with Kid Flash as a regular.
Yeah, the other episode Jessie's in, she dumps Wally, who decides to. This is our first introduction to the breakup cube, which, if we're all being completely honest, wouldn't life be a little better if this is how we actually conducted breakups? Via breakup cube.
You have no idea.
It's like a howler, but for feeling.
So Harry shows up with the breakup cube from Jessie, and Wally, of course, has to open it in front of everyone, and so he gets dumped very publicly because he doesn't understand what it is. But Wally, he leaves pretty early in the season, right?
Yeah, the actor did not want to do this anymore, apparently, and I think that was a lingering question until he apparently released a single a month or so ago that basically cemented the idea that he no longer wanted to be doing those shows anymore. Yeah, it's an internet thing. Look it up.
Right. I mean, he does go off and do a Zen Buddhist thing where he just kind of pops in every now and then, and I really appreciate that. I think that's a great way for Wally West to go.
Yeah, I mean, it gives us some flexibility because he does come back occasionally to guest star, and he's again like a very welcome. I will say when their show does write characters off, great characters like this, you do enjoy them when they come back. Like when Wally comes back, you're like, oh yay, Wally's here. When Snart comes back this season, you're like, oh good, like Snart's back. So I will say that despite having way too many characters on Arrow, the other shows know how to use their guest stars pretty appropriately, I think. And Wally's a good guest star. Whenever he shows up, you get excited.
Okay. Let's get into talking about this season's villain, who is the first major villain that is not a speedster.
Oh, so happy.
This is DeVoe, Clifford DeVoe as the Thinker.
That would have been awesome.
DeVoe! Willem Dafoe, like
Willem Dafoe, played by Willem Dafoe. That would have been great.
was the villain.
That's how the story went in 37.
But yeah, I mean, with the exception of once again using disability drop, which I talked about in our very first episode with Reverse Flash. So Clifford DeVoe is a meta who is super intelligent, way more intelligent than any other being in the universe. He's a meta, and he was created on the same night Barry was. He was outside the particle accelerator when it exploded, but has only just now revealed himself. But part of the problem with his meta powers is that they cause him to be in this wheelchair, which has been, of course, pimped out by his wife. So it can do all sorts of really cool things. I really liked Clifford DeVoe as a villain, and we can talk about how awesome he is as a villain. It really did disturb me that they kept this part of the characterization of him being in a wheelchair, because it does still reinforce this idea that disabled characters are evil, that disability is sort of this outward manifestation of their villainy. It also kind of emphasizes this idea that disabled people compensate for their disability in like mental ways. Like he's super intelligent because he can't use his body. And so that part of it was gross to me, the disability part. Everything else about the character is great.
Well, it also, the thing about the disability portion of it is it's part of what, there's an argument to be made that part of what happens there is this whole way that Team Flash tries to leverage his wife against him. And part of what they do is, well, you've just had to take care of him. You can be your own person again. And she's like, I was always my own person. Stop being this way.
Yeah, I mean, part of the problem with Team Flash is that as much as they are very nice people, they don't really know how to deal with disability, either mental or physical, very well, because there's also that through line with Killer Frost this season, which gets resolved, thankfully. But yeah, I mean, the disability part is bad. The actual character Clifford DeVoe, as the Thinker, as a non-speedster villain, I think works really well because we don't get into these weird time conundrum problems that have sort of plagued the other season.
Oh,
we do get a little time travel, but it's not, it's not the who needs to be the fastest or who is obsessed with Barry. The Thinker's obsessed with Barry because he has his own plan that he wants to put into place, and he knows Barry's the only one who can stop him. That's a pretty honest reason for wanting to destroy a superhero. It's not like I'm obsessed with you because you killed my father or because I want to be the fastest. It's like, no, you're an obstacle and I'm going to get you out of my way, which I think is way more compelling than Savitar was, for sure.
Speaking of which, I forgot how this season begins, because at the very start of the season and the end of season 3, Barry was gone.
Yes, he was in the
Speed Force jail.
Yes.
Yeah, I was really happy that this did not take over the majority of it.
Yeah, it's a nice thing they didn't learn from Flashpoint and keep it going for more than one episode.
Right. But
really good that they didn't learn that lesson.
But I really wanted them to have brought back, because when Barry gets out, he's kind of crazy. He's, he's not all together, and he keeps writing this one line that when they finally translate it and figure out what it means, it's, "This house is bitchin'." And they actually bring up this line way more, and I thought it was going to have some kind of payoff, but it doesn't really.
Yeah.
You know what's really funny is, of all the things they don't pay off, turns out that, when we keep talking about how we're so glad the Speed Force isn't emphasized and there's not a speedster this season, it turns out we don't know it until the following season, but Thawne has reinserted himself into this season. We just didn't know it yet.
Yeah, it's interesting the way that some of the things get built in this season that play out in the next season as well.
Turns out there's a much better way to do that than what they were doing.
What's interesting about this is that once you find out that DeVoe is the villain, which I will say that they did play that really well. Like, the Flash, or Barry knows that DeVoe is a villain before even meeting him, because he's heard from Savitar and from, was it?
No, it was Savitar.
Was it just Savitar?
Yeah, but it was Savitar without his. Oh man, yeah, you're right. Someone else does mention DeVoe.
Yeah, somebody else mentions DeVoe, and so he knows that he's going to eventually meet a villain named DeVoe that he's going to have to figure out how to defeat, and so he immediately knows that DeVoe is a villain, and DeVoe plays Barry so well in the first half of this season because he's pretending to be, and again, the disability is not a great look for this, but he pretends to be like this very mild-mannered, college professor who's just teaching science that just wants to be left alone, and Barry becomes like obsessed with him. Like, he becomes so obsessed with this idea that DeVoe is going to turn out to be a villain and that he's doing all of these shady things. And DeVoe keeps leaving him these little breadcrumbs, just enough to keep him interested, but enough to make Barry seem crazy to everybody else around him. And
eventually, he gets arrested.
Yeah.
For murdering DeVoe, because DeVoe is so smart, he fakes his own death.
Yeah, DeVoe ends up faking his own death, and through a very convoluted series of events that I still do not completely understand, but he ends up faking his own death, and we get another legal drama halfway through this season.
And if you've been paying attention, the prosecutor in this season of Flash is played by Mark Valley, who originally portrayed the Human Target.
So there's some nice synergy going on there. Yeah. But yeah, so I think the Thinker is a really good villain because we get all this interesting, like, we know Barry is right, but nobody else knows Barry is right. And so, everyone's like, hey, dude, chill. Like, you can't stalk him. You can't follow him to his house. You can't, go through his stuff. And so it also kind of asks us the question about that time travel always makes us ask, like, what would you do if Hitler was if you had Hitler baby in your control? Would you kill, Hitler as a baby? What does it mean to know somebody's a villain in advance because of time travel? And so it is interesting the way that they play with that this first half.
And we also get the other key question from Barry, which is, should I Like, how do I know? How do I defend myself? How do I make it clear? I know. I could just tell people I'm the Flash, and that would explain quite a lot. So we also have that issue present in this.
Right. I mean, I told my wife while we were watching this, you know what would be great? If Barry just says to the judge, look, all right, I'm the Flash. I can travel in time. I've seen the future. He's evil. Like, yeah, Barry, that would be a chunk of lies, but Barry would have revealed, he could be alone with the judge and make that reveal and let the judge make the call from there.
Right, and that's one of the whole central flaws with the MCU and the Arrowverse is the whole idea of when something bad happens, you just call all your super friends and take care of it. That's just what you do. But we can't do that all the time. So, and I think this is part of that, a related correlation of that major flaw is that, you can't just cut through it like that, although it makes sense.
Yeah.
What is DeVoe's wife's name?
It begins with an M. Marlize.
Marlize, yeah. I also found DeVoe's relationship with his wife to be one of the more compelling parts of this season, because it becomes pretty obvious after a few episodes that even though he's like this superpowered, intelligent machine that's like playing chess, with the universe and, is so far ahead of everyone in any way, that she's actually the person who's making everything happen. Did anyone else notice that? Like, he is the one who makes the decisions because he can see all of these steps, but she's the one with the tech, right? Like, she created his chair. She's the one who enacts his plan. And there's a lot of gaslighting that happens in this relationship. Like, he's constantly telling her that he's smarter than her, that he's the one who gets to make all the decisions, that she doesn't need to go off script. But at the same time, like, you get to see this really interesting relationship where she feels guilty that she has to be with him and take care of him, but she also loves him. But at the same time, she's this very competent scientist in her own right, and she ends up getting sort of mixed up in this relationship that causes her to do these really bad things.
And that's the mirror image of Harry's emotional intelligence development, is that she also has some emotional intelligence development to realize that he's taking advantage of her, and that's what ends up being Defoe's fault. Major character flaw is that he can't understand the role that emotion plays, and so when she eventually does ditch him, he didn't see it coming.
Yeah, he can't see it coming, because why would she ever do that? That's
emotional intelligence, not the kind of intelligence he possesses. So we see it happening with a lot of characters. I mean, you could bring it back to Disney too, and say that a lot of these characters evolve emotionally this season.
Well, and the season, I mean, it's definitely not. This season gives us also this sort of insight into like this abusive relationship, because he's not only gaslighting her and telling her that she's not as smart as him, but he's actually physically removing her memories of certain events. And so she doesn't remember all of the times that she's decided to leave him. She doesn't remember, like, all the times that she's disagreed with him. She ends up finding out because she sees a video that she ended up leaving herself. And so, it's not, the most nuanced, perhaps, interpretation of this relationship. But I think that it makes, again, Defoe as a villain, it makes him more complex, and it makes her more complex as a villain as well, because we get to see how someone we find out she started her scientific academic journey as someone who really wanted to help people get clean water, how somebody like that could end up doing some pretty unspeakable things.
Oh, we can get from there to the Enlightenment?
Yeah, the Enlightenment. My least favorite stage of human development, and of course that's what the thinker wants to give us as enlightenment.
Yes, by way of Meta Voltron.
So I'm just going to skip to what I think is one of the more interesting parts of this season. You know, after Barry's arrested and jailed for murder, he gets put in jail.
Despite not having any physical evidence that he murdered DeVoe.
Right. Also, at this point, because it's a CW show that has a character in prison, they have an underground fight club / slavery ring.
Oh yeah, it's part of the CW handbook.
Just
who did it better, Archie or Riverdale or the Flash?
I think Riverdale did, but
agreed.
we'll see another interesting take that surprises nobody next season on Arrow, because it's a CW show that has a character in prison.
So who did it better, Arrow, Flash, or Riverdale?
Well, at least on the one thing I'll say about the Flash version of this is at least we get former WCW / WWE superstar Goldberg. So that's a fun addition.
Yeah. And we, yeah. I forgot all about Jesus.
There's a little bit of Shawshank thrown in with the whole Warden being evil thing. So don't sleep on that.
My other favorite part is that he can get out of prison whenever he wants to. Like, he's the Flash. Like, he can get out of prison at any time. But of course, because Barry is like an ethical human being, he decides he needs to serve out his sentence. Except for times that he really needs to talk to somebody. He just leaves. He goes, talks to that person, and then returns to his cell.
Right, which, thankfully, the Warden is not only evil, but has kind of a brain, and figures this out, and tries to sell the Flash into slavery.
You know, always good. Always a good.
And which comes down to a really interesting scene or episode where Barry is breaking out of prison with all of basically the villains from the earlier part of this season. And then DeVoe just kind of shows up and is like, yeah, I knew you were going to do this, and reveals his insane ability to absorb other metas' powers.
Yeah, it turns out, so there was another event at the beginning of the season when Barry exited the Speed Force that created new metas, like a whole bus full of them, and Ralph Dibny was one of these metas. This is why we have Ralph Dibny. But these metas all get picked up by Barry throughout the series and put in jail, so DeVoe could get the Flash arrested and put in jail, so the Flash would break out these people, so DeVoe could absorb these people. It's a very convoluted plan.
10 steps ahead.
Yeah. But it works. It works. He absorbs a bunch of powers and becomes, like, very, very, very powerful. He's no longer in the wheelchair, so again, we've dispensed with that drop disability. Like, people in wheelchairs are really just faking it, and they can drop out anytime they want, I guess. And so, yeah, it's a great plan on DeVoe's part, because now he has all this power, and he's going to enact the
Yeah. So it's kind of a silly power, just kind of comes out of nowhere, but it's great. And I have to say that both of the two major actors who play DeVoe are beautiful, are able to, like, the one who plays him second, trying to find his name. Right, yeah. Yeah, Kendrick Sampson. He is able to capture the tics and the verbal acting of the other actor who's, I'm trying to look this up because there's so many different actors who play DeVoe. Yeah, at least 6 different actors play DeVoe in this season. But
yeah, he sort of body jumps for a while.
Yeah. He really does. Man, I Neil Sandilands. Yeah, they're both able to switch. A lot of them are able to actually, like, do the verbal tics and everything, and I thought that was a really nice.
You can really tell it's DeVoe.
Yeah,
like all these people are clearly trying to play the same person. And so even though he's in a different body, and he does end up back, in a body that looks like his original, sans the disability, he's still, like you said, you can tell that it's him no matter who's playing him, which works really well. I will also say, as a college professor, I had forgotten about this, but as someone who actually does teach college students, DeVoe's whole plan is inspired by his students spending time in his class on their cell phones. Does anyone remember this? Like, he's tired of his students sitting there just looking at their cell phones, and he wants everyone to
listen to him,
to go back to a more enlightened time, apparently before cell phones. When we actually thought about deep things, because again, here's another person, like maybe some current politicians we know, that thinks that there's this mythical time where everything was better and humans were better.
Is it that he wanted people to think about deep things, or is it because he wanted to tell people what the deep things were because he's smarter?
Probably a little bit of both. But like, on the one hand, I totally abhor like this idea of like, we're gonna go back to a time, and I like that it's called the Enlightenment, because again, the Enlightenment was terrible. Don't at me. But
I mean, maybe for
we know how to at you because of the Enlightenment. So.
But like, I abhor the idea of like deciding what intelligence is and how people should be intelligent and what kinds of things that they should study. But at the same time, I really identify with this anti-cell phone thing that he has going on in classrooms, because I'm constantly telling my students to put their cell phones away. So, I mean, I have some sympathy for this guy, for one of his motives, but not how he decides to go about fixing it.
Are you launching giant satellites in the sky?
No, I am not. That's not the right way to fix it.
All right.
And, Sam, since I know you will want to talk about this, let's just go ahead and bring in the special guest star for this season, the amazing guest star, Danny Trejo.
Yes, Machete, Breacher lives.
So, have we talked about Gypsy on this show?
We talked about it a little bit, but we're already over an hour.
Oh, no. I don't want to go into detail. Danny Trejo, a.k.a. Breacher, is Gypsy's father. So Cisco, who is dating Gypsy at this point, has to discuss his relationship with Danny Trejo. I don't even know. Like, is there another name for him besides Breacher? Like, it's Danny Trejo.
No, his and actually his name is
Josh.
That's right, Josh. And by the way, this episode that Danny Trejo shows up in is, of course, Flash Bingo, because it's also directed by Kevin Smith.
Oh, yeah.
Because of course it is.
Oh, yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, that totally, all of that seems. No, it's great. I mean, Danny Trejo.
It's just fun.
I mean, do we even have to say? It's like a fun cameo, and this reminded me of an earlier time in Flash where we just did things for the hell of it.
Well, just remember, don't forget, the very next episode after Breacher shows up, Breacher shows up a couple of times. One of them is directed by Kevin Smith, but the very first time that Breacher shows up, the very next episode after that is the Bachelorette Party show.
Which is
also
episode.
A lot of fun. There's a lot of fun in this season.
Yeah, so, we're not going to talk about the crossover until next week, but the big event in the crossover this season is the wedding of Iris and Barry. And so there's a lot of stuff in this first half of the season that's sort of counting down towards that. And one of them is the Bachelorette party episode where we get Felicity. Felicity comes over from Arrow to be part of the Bachelorette party. It's just a fun episode.
We completely forgot to mention from the season of Arrow that during the crossover, which we'll talk about later, Oliver and Felicity commit the ultimate wedding party foul.
Oh yeah, they really do.
And decide to get married themselves. So we totally forgot to mention that happens on this season of Arrow, is that they actually get married.
Oliver and Felicity actually get back together
Hooray.
and decide that they want to get married.
Yeah.
But
anyway.
The best part about The Bachelor, there are two good parts about The Bachelorette episode. One is that Barry gets drunk. They find a way to get him drunk, and they go to a strip club. And that's just fun. Digby takes them all to a strip club, Harry and Joe included. Joe gets to see his stepdaughter dancing as a stripper. So that was fun. Cecile's pregnant. We didn't mention that, so there's another child on its way.
And she develops
meta powers because of her pregnancy, which is kind of great, actually. I enjoyed that. But the other really interesting thing, and this was something that had been bothering me since last season, is that the Bachelorette party we get to actually get closure on the whole is Killer Frost a villain or not storyline. Because, like I said last time we talked about The Flash in season 3, Barry and company really bungle Killer Frost. And I don't want to rehash the whole thing, but the fact that they treat her like a villain just because she has powers is frankly very, very unfeminist in so many ways. And this season we get to see Killer Frost actually not just become part of the team, but we actually get to see at the end of this episode, because she comes out and she sort of saves the Bachelorette party from this other villain. We actually get to see her stand up for herself, both Caitlin and Killer Frost, to Barry and Cisco, because they show back up and they're like, oh my gosh, Killer Frost is back, we have to fight her. And she's like, and Iris basically says, no, you have to listen to what she has to say. And it's not on screen, and I really wish that scene was on screen, where she finally just says, listen, this is who I am, I'm not a villain, you're gonna have to just deal with it. And I really wish that they would have had Barry apologize to her.
We're still waiting for that apology.
Yeah, I'm still waiting for the apology for all the emotional harm that he did to Caitlin during last season, or season 3 of The Flash, because really he basically told her that he was going to cure her of her powers because her powers were going to make her evil.
And by the way, she had her powers long before Barry ever did. We also find out right before the finale.
Do we find out in the finale?
Yes.
Okay.
That, as it turns out,
That's right.
Yeah, and we get more into her family in the next season, but the reveal is that
she's not a metahuman.
Yeah, this is who she is.
Yeah, she's not a metahuman. She's actually a different kind of human, I guess. I don't know if there's actually a word for what she is exactly. But yeah, I mean, and Killer Frost is wonderful, of course, and so we get a lot of interplay between her and other characters over the next couple of seasons. But it really annoyed me. I guess that was the best they could do at that point, but it really annoyed me we never got an apology.
Right. And just trying to wrap this up with time, basically, DeVoe takes over Ralph's body, and you really see how overpowered Ralph is. And everyone thinks Ralph is dead, and it's a really touching amount of scenes where Ralph finds out that DeVoe wants him and gets scared and is terrified for his life, and it's some great character development. And
Barry grieves too. Barry takes it really hard too, so you get that as well.
Yeah, because it's great because Ralph actually trusted Barry and Barry failed. Yeah, it's wonderful. And they end up fighting against DeVoe and beating him, and
but they're not sure how they beat him.
It's okay. It's okay. They just beat him, and that has no impact at all on the next season.
Yeah, totally random character in a coffee shop shows up a couple times in season 2. That's nothing.
Right, who also shows up and gives flowers? Yes, gives wedding flowers.
Yeah,
she's a bartender too.
So this character shows up a couple of times in the series, just in random places. Yeah, during the crossover, she shows up at Jitters a couple of times and gives characters pieces of advice.
Super awkward.
Very awkward. And yeah, it turns out in this last episode, during the Enlightenment, DeVoe was using the different satellites to do the thing that he wanted to do. Again, techie, sciencey stuff. And Barry ends up destroying the Starlab satellite in order to stop the Enlightenment. But he has help from a mysterious person, also in a costume. And so after everything's resolved, everybody's fine. Harry goes back to Earth, blah, blah, blah. This mysterious person shows up, this person we've been seeing all season, and reveals herself to be burying Iris's daughter from the future.
Dun, dun,
End of
dun.
season. Dun, dun, dun.
Yeah, because it apparently bucking up time is a familial trait.
Yeah. We'll get to that in about 3 weeks when it becomes relevant.
Yeah, but that's this season. Much better than season 3.
Overall, what would you guys rate season 6 of Arrow? On
bottom of the list.
Okay. And where would you rank season 4 of The Flash?
Second best season behind season 2.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. Season 4. Season 1.
Yeah, I agree both with you guys. So now that we were able to do this in under an hour and almost under an hour 15, can you guys plug your pluggables?
Yes, I am on Twitter at Tessa.
You can find me on Twitter at Sam_Morris9.
All right. You can find me on Twitter at Hebrews Paleo. You can find the podcast at geek101podcast.com. That's all we have for today. Thank you. Class dismissed.